Hey everyone, Thomas from Medieval Review here, and I'm here with Greg Wenderski. He is the sword casting guy. You may have seen him on YouTube. If you haven't, just go check out some of his videos. I'll make sure to link them in the description below. But Greg, we just got done with an entire day of doing a class. A lot of kids. It was really cool to see them being very interested in the process and very engaged. So I see future channel viewers when I look out at that audience,
Right.
but also just sword lovers in general, people who enjoy it. And you helped me cast some swords. The first one that I did, this is off of one of your molds. This is an Egyptian khopesh. And I just wanted to have a khopesh that I made, so I wanted to make that. But more importantly, you helped me turn a 3D print I did. For those who've been on the channel a while, have seen my videos on the Arslantepe swords, the oldest known Bronze Age swords, and Greg helped me make one out of, now it's aluminum, not bronze, but I got to go through the entire process, and after I talk to Greg here, I'll kind of talk you through the process that we went through. And you did a really good job. It's a family affair. Your son is here as well. And you helped me clean this up and make it look real nice. And I'll go back and finish up a couple of areas that are a little bit more probably hard to get to with an angle grinder. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
I traveled around the country making Bronze Age swords, mostly with kids. I started out doing this in Austin, Texas, kind of working with everybody. I was teaching a multi-age class there and trying to find my audience. And these days I found my audience mostly with homeschool kids because they are looking for things to do and they can do any day of the week. So I just do this all over the country, and I do maybe between 80 and 100 classes a year. So I'm just all over the place. Right now I'm in Georgia. My next stop is going to be in Austin, Texas, and Dallas. In January I'll be in Southern California and Phoenix, Arizona. So I kind of go all over the place.
And so you should totally check out his website, swordcastingguy.com.
That's it.
And you can see his schedule, where he's going to be. I highly recommend coming to do this class, adult or child, either way. Certainly if you have kids, it is wonderful. You made it very safe for all the kids, which was really important. You made it a lot of fun. What I liked more than anything is that you made it very educational. So the process was there, but you actually walked through the history of some of each of the different patterns of swords, and that was just fantastic. So again, it's really kind of entering that spark into people who see swords in movies. You talked a lot about the popular culture of something like the khopesh, where it shows up in all sorts of strange places now, but no one really knows the actual history of it when they're just watching Game of Thrones or the Scorpion King or whatever. And so there's a chance to learn about it, make their own, understand what went into it kind of from a historical standpoint. So I think that's really great. But definitely go check out his website, go check out the schedule. Highly recommend it. It was a wonderful class, Greg. Thank you so much.
All right.
And I'll walk you through the process right now as to how I made this sword. Well, thank you, past me. This is present me recording a voiceover of this video for future you. I apologize up front for the audio in that initial clip. I did not go to this class with the intent of fully making it a YouTube video production. I was really just planning on mostly recording my process and doing this voiceover piece. But Greg was more than willing to come on camera a bit, and so I kind of, at the very last minute, the very end of the class when everyone had left, we shot that video. But I also found out when I got home, prepped this video, oh no, the on-camera mic has just gone completely south, and I'm sorry for the audio quality, but it's not about the quality, it's about the content. Alright, so let's talk about the process that I'm going through here. I've got a lot of footage, and I'm going to more or less let it play uncut. I've done a few strategic edits, but for the most part, it's going to go uncut. And I just kind of want to walk you through the process of casting a sword. Now, I'm being very careful to not step on Greg Wenderski's toes here. This is his job. This is what he does. He goes around and teaches classes on this stuff. And I didn't want to necessarily just like record his class. I think that should be his to work with. And certainly, to some extent, his process here is a little bit his to own as well. But I do think it's interesting. Greg obviously gave me the blessing to kind of post this information, show it out, because ultimately it does drive, more people towards him and the stuff he's doing. And I think what he's doing is absolutely fantastic. All right, so what I am showing you right now is the very, very first step of prepping the casting box. And this is actually the second one I've done. It's why you see a lot of this sand sitting on the table right now. I will actually cut back to the first one I did for a reason. I'm playing these a little bit out of order. So we got basically 4 bolts that hold the lid of this box on. And there are 2 halves to this box that are held together by basic latches. The lid comes off with these 4 screws, and they have a couple of guide pins in them to make sure that they go on the exact right way. And then you see the second half of the box where that lid came off going under the table there. So this is the bottom, and it's just, it's a frame. And you can see the kind of back end there with a little crescent moon kind of cut out of it, and some of the wood actually burned away. That is a piece of metal that bridges the gap. That's where ultimately the molten metal will go into the mold. And so what I'm doing is I'm filling this with what is called green sand. Green sand is kind of a special mixture of sand, certain types of the silicon particulate, and probably some other stuff. I'm not real clear on all the details. You can actually go look it up, green sand. And it is, it's wet. It's got some water added to it, just enough water to add some consistency. You think about making a sand castle, you want the sand to stick together. Completely dry sand doesn't stick. So you need it to have that good consistency. Now, I am using the kind of remnants, the leftovers of the sand that was used in a previous casting process. So they obviously recycle and reuse the sand over and over and over again. And they do a lot to process it, take out a lot of big chunks. There were so many people at this class, and a lot of them were kids, and a lot of them were families. I didn't want to step on their toes. I didn't want me making a video to, make me kind of be the special person in the space and force everyone to abide by my presence. So I actually elected to basically do all my stuff lagging behind everyone else. So while everyone else was watching basically the casting process going on, I was back here actually building out the mold. And that meant I had to actually deal with a lot of big chunk particulate. So in the casting process, when you got really hot metal up against sand, you actually are basically, there are some chunks in there that are hard as rock. And I mean, really as hard as rock. And as I was finding those, I was pulling them out. I think the first pass, the first people doing this, they probably didn't have to compete with that too much, but I definitely did. So you'll see me periodically picking out, little and large chunks of what look like rock. It's really just really, really hardened sand, basically through heat. That wouldn't exist after they've processed it properly, but they had to do a quick job to get me and a couple other people who were waiting behind some of the additional remnant sand. They just basically ran out. Too many people learning to do this really awesome process. Now, I'm packing the sand by hand. I'm giving it kind of a little bit of a light tap on top, and then I will use this board to do a kind of like a crosshatch pattern on it to kind of pack it down. The goal is to get kind of 2 things right. One is very consistent kind of levels across everything and consistency to the sand across the board. The entire box needs to be packed more or less to the same level of consistency. And that consistency is kind of a little bit spongy. I would say a little bit more firm than moss, basically. You should be able to kind of depress your thumb in it. And at least in one of the molds, I followed that basically to a T, and that is this mold. And then there's this process. I forgot what it's called, but it's basically kind of this sawing process to then do the second important piece, which is to level off the sand, to make it very, very level. And so this is a process. Again, I don't remember what the name is. It's actually used similarly by some people who do like laying of concrete and whatnot to keep it really, really level. So the sand through this process is going to be perfectly level with the edge of the boards making up the walls of this side of the box. And I'm going to do my best to keep it very level, very consistent, and to have that kind of sponginess. And it does take a little bit of time. Part of me showing you this ultimately uncut for the most part is to show you that it can be done relatively quickly. I mean, we're talking order of magnitude minutes here. It's not a huge amount of time, but it does take time to get it right, and you do want to get it right because ultimately if you do things wrong, it can lead to failures down the line in the casting process. So you can see I'm kind of checking, making sure things are smooth, smoothing it out, trying to preserve the sand as much as possible because that green sand is valuable, don't want it falling on the ground. And I'm making sure that's very even and clear. And you can see that I'm going to prep here a couple things. One is I'm going to, looks like I'm still kind of lining up, but I'm going to actually make sure that I know how I want to actually set the blank template. So this is going to be the Egyptian khopesh that I'm going to put into this mold. And so I'm gonna want to make sure that I understand exactly where I want it. Basically the pommel section, as it were, the very end of the grip there, needs to be just a little bit off of that pouring section. And of course, because of the shape of the khopesh, I need to make sure that it fits within the box and it's not getting too closest to the edge. So you want a little bit of a standoff between the sand and the edge of the wood. And that should be pretty obvious, right? So you're about to pour molten metal into this mold. You don't want to do that where it can touch the wood. The wood will burn, whereas the sand won't. It's got basically a much higher melting temperature, so it will help to both cool and cool the metal, in this case aluminum, and protect the wood of the case. And so this is a separating powder. It's being applied with basically like a cheesecloth type thing. Not too dissimilar from the little dusting cloths that you might get in, say, a katana care kit, right? Something that can hold a polishing powder or something. In this case, this is some sort of powder. I don't actually know what it is. I'll have to maybe ask. I would assume it's something like a baby powder, but whatever it is different than the sand, and it will actually help the two separate sides of the mold to separate without the sand sticking together. I had to go back multiple times to get new bags because just like the sand was a scarce resource, so too are these bags. And so I finally got enough in there to kind of do the separating powder enough. Oh, kick the camera there. And so here we are. Now I'm placing that khopesh blank back into the mold, and I'm going to line it up. And then the next step is going to be to depress that into the sand. Now, keeping in mind, this sand is a little bit spongy in nature, so it should more or less take the shape of most of this blank. And the way I'm going to actually end up doing this is I'm going to press it a little bit, but then I'm going to take that wooden lid and set it on top so I can add a good bit more weight to it. And that weight that I'm going to add to it is going to be me, my feet. So you can actually see in my shadow there, I'm kind of just stepping on it, getting it pushed down to the sand a little bit. I'm not putting like all my weight on it. I don't need to put all my weight on it. Pretty big person, but you need enough to really get it down in that sand. And when I get it back up on the table here in just a second, you will get to see what it looks like once it's depressed. And if you look carefully, you'll actually see some cracking in the sand. That's actually okay. That's not a big deal. That's not really going to do anything bad to the mold itself. But I've gotten it depressed, and now it is ready for the second layer of sand. So basically, we have the lid part with its, the actual lid open. So the second half of the casting box, and I put it on upside down there. It's got those guiding pins in it, so that was why I knew. And also, I had the actual mold opening, the metal opening there at the end. It was upside down. All right, so it's in place. I made a mistake here. I shouldn't have done this. I forgot to latch it at first. So I started adding some of the sand. I forgot to latch it. I'll go back and do that in a moment. I also made a second mistake that I shouldn't make. Those 4 holes where the bolts go, they need to have something in them to prevent sand from getting in them. I will also remedy that mistake shortly. So, Greg, I'm sorry that I may have messed up one of your boxes here. It was not intentional. I was trying to rush to get this in line for the casting process because I knew that we are rapidly approaching finishing that part up. And actually, as a note, I got it right down to the wire. Like, I got my boxes there right as they were getting ready to do the last couple pours. So I managed to not completely throw off the timeline of the class. And here's where I think you can see I go, oh yeah, I might be dropping sand into those holes. Let me not do that. So we have these little nails that we're going to put drop into those holes just to keep them from getting sand in it. It's a good practice to have. And again, I'm having to kind of sort through this sand, get rid of some of the harder pieces that were in there. And it's actually interesting. Look at the color consistency difference between the sand that I'm putting in the mold and the old sand that's sitting outside of it. Just that quickly, and I think it's partially because you can see there's now sunlight pretty hefty on my table. Just that quickly, the sand is drying out, and dry sand is no good for this. So you kind of have to work quickly enough to keep the sand moist, not let it dry out. You want to do this in the shade, obviously, because direct sunlight's going to dry it out quickly. But you can see you can see the color difference. The wet sand is much more green in its color, and the other one's much more gray. And so I'm packing this in, and I'm packing this in much, much tighter. So whereas the first half of the box was done with kind of a spongy, consistency in mind, I am doing this now with a kind of rock hard consistency. So I'm putting a lot of weight. That's why the table is rocking so much. I'm putting as much pressure as I can onto this sand to really press it all down. And that's simultaneously also going to press down the sand on the other side of the mold. So really both ends, both sides of this mold box are going to be pretty hard in terms of the consistency of the sand once it's all pressed in. And of course, I'm pressing it against, but I've got that separating powder to make sure that when it's time to open this box up and check the mold and pull the blank out, it can be done without it all falling apart or the sand sticking to each other. All right, so I'm getting that consistency in there, and I'm about to get a little bit of help. You can see, oh, yeah, I totally forgot to lock that. Oops. Thankfully, Greg's son, who was right there, was helping me out, and he reminded me to do that step. So it's really easy to forget a step here, and there are a lot of kind of unique steps. You'd think you'd remember them all, but just like anything, you can make a mistake. All right, so kind of the last part of this, after I kind of get everything pressed down, I will ultimately kind of scrape the top and get it level. But yeah, I'm telling you, this is a bit of a process, and it's actually a bit of a workout getting all the sand pressed in. And I did 2 of these molds back to back, with this one being the second one, and I was definitely rushing at this point. But I've got to get as much packed in. I can't leave any low points. Better to have high points across the board here. No low points at all. Because I'm going to ultimately take that lid and basically scrape off the top any of the excess. And we've got to get, obviously, the sides of, or, basically where the lid's going to sit, it's got to be clear of sand and debris so it can screw down and bolt down tight and hold everything together for the actual pour. Yeah, so there's not a lot to say about this process beyond this point, other than look at me pack stuff down as quickly as I possibly can. And I'll take this opportunity while I'm kind of finishing it up, and you'll see me scrape it off here in a moment, to just say that, what's really cool about this class is, as I mentioned in kind of the intro with Greg, there's a lot of kind of teaching opportunities here. People are having this as like a craft activity. They're building this thing out. They're making these awesome molded swords. We were using aluminum, not bronze, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The clearest one to me, the most obvious one, I think it's the biggest one for Greg as well, is bronze is really, really, really heavy, and Greg has to travel around with this stuff, and he's got to pull a trailer full of metal, and it's much easier on your gas budget, your fuel budget, to pull aluminum. So he wasn't using bronze. I wish it had been bronze, but I get why it's not. The class is really cool. It held a lot of cool kind of historical context. He walked through every single one of his sword blanks and talked about the history of them, with only one of them being an ahistorical sword blank, which is basically he had a bronze wakizashi blank that he was offering for people who wanted to be the weeb, I guess. But no, I think it's actually great. There were quite a few people who were like, "Oh, I do martial arts. I like to have a wakizashi instead of, I don't know, a Zifos or a Kopesh." So, but he had a lot of cool different blanks, a couple little scimitars. He tried to kind of pull from all the different regions that had bronze. Bronze casting is kind of part of their history. And so you can see I've got it nice and level for the most part. I keep doing a couple leveling jobs. I want to get this part just right, getting some of the debris out. And then I'm going to pull those nails out so I can bolt down the lid. And that'll take just a moment. So yeah, the class itself kind of was broken up into multiple sections, and he explained the process. Adults and kids were doing this. I think in honestly a great way. A lot more kids than adults, and I think that's really awesome. I wanted to do this because, well, I certainly wanted to learn this process, and obviously I could have self-taught myself, I think, a lot of this, but it's a lot easier to learn from someone who's been doing it a while, and you kind of you can learn from their mistakes. And I was paying really close attention to how things were constructed, how these boxes were constructed, and the processes that he went through to kind of make this as easy as possible. And so this is going to take you end to end with both the Kopesh and the Arslantepe sword that I ended up doing. And I'll talk about the Arslantepe sword here a little bit more detailed in a moment. We'll actually take a break from this mold making process to actually talk about the precursor to this. So lid is on, bolts are tightened. I like to do a crisscross pattern when tightening bolts. That's my own preference. I believe it gives you a nice even tightening where you can get everything just right. If you tighten one side down too much, you might get things off a bit, in my opinion. So that's how I tightened it. And now we're basically carving out a little bit of the sand at the opening, using a little pipe to make it so that the molten aluminum will actually be able to make its way down into the mold. So that's actually how the mold will be poured. And now it's kind of the moment of truth. We get to flip these latches and hope and pray that what comes out is a proper mold. And it's quite heavy lifting over that box, but there you go. So there is the mold itself. The blank Kopesh is in there. You can see that the sand has taken its form. In a moment, we will take the blank out in order to leave the space in between all the sand to actually act as the mold itself. And I got Greg's son. He came over, and we needed to double check it, make sure everything was good, making sure the distance from the edges of the box were good. Kind of clear out. You can see I'm pulling the blank out now. And then at the opening, he's kind of knocking away some of the sand. You want that opening nice and clear of debris, because any debris that could be there will fall down to the tip. And then he's cutting a couple of vents here, very, very small vents, and that's just to allow any moisture, which there is a lot in that sand that builds up, to escape through those channels instead of doing things you wouldn't want it to do that could potentially mess up the molding process. So now I'm checking those pins, those guide pins. I'm setting the box back down, and I am latching it. And basically, that's it. That mold is now ready for the pouring process and actually getting the molten metal in there to take the form. So there's some cleanup to do, and you can see me cleaning up here. But as you watch the cleanup process happen, I will begin to introduce one of the main things I really wanted to do. So my lovely wife, found out about this class, that it was happening pretty close to where I live. And so I was very excited to get the opportunity to do it. And one of the offers that is made by Greg when you sign up for the class is, if you want to bring your own blank, you can do so. Well, I definitely want to do that. So what I did was I found a nice high quality version of the Arslantepe swords. One of them is, it's basically the true to scale large size sword in that collection. And I 3D printed it. So here's my 3D printer going brrr, and making its lovely version of these swords. And I actually did a couple of versions. The very first one I did was basically straight off the 3D model. So the 3D model I got access to. It's a very nice model, but it was designed just for visuals, not for 3D printing. There's this whole process that goes into cleaning up a 3D model, making it what's called manifold, which means it represents a true volume. And I had to do a lot of prep on it, and that took a lot of time. I'm not showing it here. Just trust me, I did it. And the first one I printed that you just saw get done, it printed, but it was very thin, and I knew going in that it needed to be a little bit thicker, specifically in the blade. I didn't touch the hilt at all. I just modified the blade to be a little bit thicker so that when all of this is glued together and put into a mold, the mold could hold and the metal could get down all the way to the tip unobstructed, because that's going to be highly necessary. And you will actually see I'm doing multiple attempts here. So I ended up doing 3 full sword prints. This second one it was also a thin one. You can actually see it in the blade there. It just looks a little bit thinner. And so I kept adjusting it, and this print is the almost final print. It's certainly the final print for the majority of the sword. This was for the blade and for the hilt. More or less accurate to what I wanted in terms of thickness to appropriately make a mold. I was, after the fact, I decided that I actually wanted to capture one of my favorite features of the Arslantepe swords, which is the little triangle iconography in it, which I will, from here on out, lovingly call the Triforce, because everyone who ever saw these swords immediately thought Triforce from The Legend of Zelda. And I realized that, of course, this being based on the largest sword of the Arslantepe collection, it didn't have that symbol in it, so I went a little bit anachronistic here, and I reprinted the grip piece of this mold. I reprinted it to include that little Triforce looking logo right where it should be. You see that appearing in the 3D print right now. And so these time lapses don't tell you quite how long it takes to do this print, but these are, I think, about 6 to 11 hour prints. I think like doing the full sword is closer to that 11-hour mark, maybe even a little bit longer. It took quite a long time, and I was doing it at a very high resolution because I didn't want the quality of the print to mess up the quality of the mold. All right, so here's a nice clean table, because I actually prepped this mold first. I did do 2 swords. I did the Khopesh that you just saw, and then, of course, I did this Arslantepe sword. And you can see the finished model here. The little bit of coloration that you see on 2 parts of the blade are actually wood filler. Wood filler is actually a great way to fill in gaps. And because this sword was printed in 3 parts, those 3 parts got glued together with some really amazing super glue that holds it together really well. But it can leave a little bit of a gap. So I used wood filler to fill it in, and I sanded it down. That managed to, keep a consistent, surface to the entire blank here. That is a 3D printed blank. And I'm now prepping the box. And yeah, same process, right? Take those bolts out and all the rest. Now, one of the challenges here is the dimensions of this sword. I try to keep it as true as I am aware of, to the actual original measurements of the largest sword in the Arslantepe collection. And quite frankly, it might have been a little bit too big for the box, was my concern. So we were checking that. And come to find out, no, it was just the right size, although it came really close. Specifically right there at kind of the cross point of the hilt. Gets really close to the wood. You can see I actually put it in wrong there for a moment. You definitely want to start the mold, the tip, the furthest away from the pour point. It's the smallest point. You need to get the liquid down there. And of course, the pommel section is going to be the largest point of the pour and will receive the most material the quickest for purposes of flow. So I did actually step away from this for a moment, which is why it's just kind of hanging here. I stepped away to go basically ask the question, okay, come check this. Is it going to be, just just maybe a little bit too big. Am I going to have to give up on this? The answer is no. They thought we could make it work. So I'm skipping ahead because this is a pretty long process. This is the very end of the packing process. You can see I have the lid there. I'm going to finish it up. There were a lot of concerns with doing this with a 3D print that I had. Chief among that, especially with those glue points, was this thing going to break when I'm pressing down on it, when I'm pushing it into the mold, and then I'm pushing all this force into it? Am I actually going to break my 3D print in the process and kind of ruin the mold? And then and there, I wouldn't really be able to redo it, which would have been a shame. Thankfully, that did not occur, spoiler and all. So, while you're watching me do this, I will go back to talking a little bit about the class. So, Greg, this is an all-day class that Greg runs. It started at 9 a.m. and it ran straight through till about 3 p.m. And there was a lunch break for some people, but Greg himself didn't really get much of a break at all. He basically ran this class the entire time, and he's very, very efficient at it. They know exactly what they're doing. They've got it down to a science. It's clear they've run this class a lot, and they've gotten a lot of, I think, feedback into timing and all the rest. You can see we're checking the consistency. It is rock hard as it needs to be. Adding a little bit of sand to a few areas you can see, and then I'm going to give it its kind of last finishing push there. Try to get it all nice and level. So then we're going to clear off the sand from the edges, take the little nails out. There was a lot of interest in the Arslantepe sword here because this was not a blank that they had. This is one I brought. A lot of people thought it looked really cool. A lot of people saw the Triforce on it, got real excited, called it the Zelda sword. But it actually gave me an opportunity to talk about the history of it. So I got to be kind of called a secondary historical teacher while I was there. I did not want to take anything away from Greg and his process and take any of the spotlight off of him. So I tried really hard to not do that. I wanted to just be a participant. So a lot of me is doing this as just being a participant, but you got people asking questions, so you want to answer it. Greg had a lot of questions. He asked a lot of questions about it, and I told him about it. So like I said, there's a lot of interest in this one. You can see the number on the box. This is how they kept track of whose sword was what, because they had about, I think it was 7 or 8 different blank styles. A couple, like a Xiphos, a Khopesh, a Chris, a Wakizashi, a Scimitar, a couple other swords that are blanking on my mind, like some of the British Isles Bronze Age swords. There's probably 50 or so people participating in this, maybe even more, all making these boxes. So they were all individually numbered. But number 34 was my magic number here. I was like, okay, I'm gonna follow that box through the entire process because I want to capture the process of making this Arslantepe sword and molding it. I think it'd be really cool. But that's how they keep track of everything, and they'll end up sharpieing the grips of all the swords of the participants, so people know which sword is theirs. They can track it through the process. There's no confusion or fighting over it. But yeah, with 50 participants, and I would say closer to maybe 75 people there total, for especially every child participant you had maybe 1 or 2 adults there. Some entire families were doing it. As Greg mentioned in our opening conversation, it's good for homeschooling. A lot of homeschool groups do this when they teach during the weekdays instead of the weekends. This was a weekend class, but it can happen. All right, so we are about to open this and see how it turned out. And I was very nervous about this step for a few reasons. One, I was doing it with a 3D print. 2, this was my first time doing it. By the time I got around to the Khopesh, I felt like I knew the process a good bit better. Now, I actually started to unlatch it. I forgot to actually clear out the pour point, so I went back, relatched it, and now I'm unlatching it. And we're going to open it up, and here we go. Moment of truth. Did I successfully make a mold of the Arslantepe sword? Like I said, it's kind of heavy, so turn it around. And there you go. It's actually kind of hard to differentiate my 3D print blank from the sand, but here you see it being pulled out right there. And there it is. There is the mold. And you'd think a lot of detail could get lost. And there's some checking of, okay, what's the quality? Did it all work? The recommendation that was given to me with this blank specifically was to, the first half of that box that you would have being spongy sand, the recommendation was actually make it a little bit less spongy. So I packed it a little bit tighter, and it did. It worked really well. I actually think this mold looks better than the mold of the Khopesh. So here we are going to cut the vents in. And again, that's an important step. So yeah, this sword definitely generated a lot of interest, and it was a lot of fun talking to people about it and kind of showing it off. A lot of questions around like the grip size of it. That seems really big and awkward, and you kind of explain how it would be held, and it makes more sense and people understand it. And especially kids, like this is their first real exposure to a sword. In many cases, they're going to walk away with it's a very blunt mold of a sword, but it gets to feel like a real sword to them, and that's exciting. Some of the parents were talking about the swords they got at Renaissance festivals and whatnot. So you get a broad range of people here. All right, so the mold was done. I had to clear off my table as much as I could. To prep for the Khopesh mold, which we've already seen. So at this point, we're going to cut to, the pouring process. So with there being so many molds, this was the very last batch. So like I said, I made it just in time. And the two rightmost molds here, number 34 and number 9, are my two. And here's the molten aluminum going in. And it's pouring in till it kind of pops out in mushrooms at the top. Whoop! There you go. And then the second one. And it's a really interesting thing that Greg was explaining about the pouring process. I never really thought about it. But it actually creates a bit of a straw effect when you're pouring, specifically, I think, molten aluminum, but really any molten metal like this. The outer edge cools kind of quickly. And you have to just trust that it's pouring, even if you can't always tell. So all the big boxes are going to be bigger, proper swords, the Khopeshes, the Xiphoses, the scimitars. But then the smaller boxes are daggers, and I think that included the wakizashi as well, but they had a kris, which was pretty neat. And so there we go. The pour is done. And it doesn't take too long for it to cool to the point where they can be moved, but you can see them kind of steaming and not quite setting fire to anything, but you can obviously see on the boxes where the wood has been singed before. The big concern is actually leaks from the mold. That's the big thing they want to avoid. As far as I'm aware, there were no leaks when I was there, but for, I would say, 90% of the pours that were occurring, I was not present for them. I was packing those boxes. And so in a moment, we will see these boxes get laid out on a table, and then they'll get opened. All right, so they've cooled sufficiently enough by this point to actually pull the boxes out. There's my magic number 34 going on the table. Greg put it right in front of the camera for me so I could record it. And I could not wait to get to it. It was the very last box, the very last mold to be opened at the end of the day. So I kind of felt like a nice natural kind of climax to the entire story, basically, of this class. And I think everyone was kind of really excited. Everyone around me, anyway, was really excited to see it. Obviously, there were a lot of kids running around, but a lot of the adults had taken a keen interest in it at this point. And obviously, Greg was very keenly interested to see how it ended up turning out. So he's having to lay all these out on the table, and he kind of, the way he does it, he wants good participation from everyone, including opening up the mold. But there's obviously some quasi-danger involved with some of this. So the pouring, he doesn't allow anyone to do. Good for him. He shouldn't. Also, the unlatching of the boxes, he actually does not allow people to do, at least on one end of the box, and that's the end where the pour occurred, just because there is still very hot metal over there. If people aren't paying attention, they do the wrong thing. It could be a problem. I think you could actually see back there, there was maybe a bit of leak out of one of these because he had to take a piece of the aluminum off. And you also see a little kid there poking at things they probably shouldn't. So number 9 is also one of mine. That is the Khopesh. And so he put it over there near number 34 just to make sure that I could get it all in my shot. And And then in a moment, once he's got all these laid out, we'll start unlatching them, and then we'll do the reveal. And, you know, the reveal is done somewhat ceremonially. So here you go. I'm trying to abide by the rules. I could probably unlatch the other ones being a responsible adult, but I did exactly what I should do to reflect best practices for all the participants, even though there was that one kid that kept poking at things. And so, you know, there's Greg. He's unlatching the other side. And then the other side of number 9. And then we're going to open these up in a moment. So I'm going to skip ahead to that part because, quite frankly, it'd be very boring to just sit here and stare at this mold. But like I said, there's a bit of a ceremony involved with this process. Everyone got to walk up to their specific mold, get it uncovered. He would announce what type of blade it was. They'd go ooh and ah over it. You couldn't take it out of the mold immediately. It's still very, very hot. You would not want to touch these immediately upon opening the mold. After a moment of sitting in it, Greg would actually take it out and set it on the ground away from people to let it cool even further. It is amazing how long molten aluminum, when it solidifies, is still incredibly hot. And of course, that applies to basically any molten metal. All right, anyway, skipping ahead now to the boxes actually being unlatched. So you can see he's kind of going down the line here, and he's opening up the boxes. And you know, here he goes. He's going to open up this one. He's like, "Oh, look, it's a Chris. It's a Chris dagger. A little bit of that wavy pattern in the blade. And here we go. This is going to be the Kopesh." And there was an interesting conversation that would begin to occur when we got to number 34 here, the Arslantepe sword. So I'm gonna quit talking for a moment, cut up the audio in the background. You can actually hear what we talked about.
Okay, 34.
I didn't feel a burn. That one's already ready.
Look at that.
Well, that turned out real nice.
Yeah, it did. And that is amazing. That narrow little bit of sand, and it was just fine. Mostly when you see people do casting on YouTube or wherever, they have these great big boxes that are doing this little thing inside it, where it's like they have this giant box. And I really kind of push the limits of like how small boxes can be because I have motivation to do that. Extremely pushing limit. That's amazing. And I think that mold still looks pretty good. I might heat up a little more metal and pour it again. Crank it down. Well, we got one to do. Let's not do that.
You can have the print.
Okay, that's awesome. I'll take you up on that. That's so exciting.
All right, so what you could hear at the tail end of that was he wanted to actually pour the mold again so he could have a copy of the sword, but he didn't because there were too many people, and he didn't want to eat up their time. And so what I told him was, look, you can have the 3D print. I will give it to you. And you can actually see in the original mold here, I got a couple different angles of it, so forgive the camera moving around jerkily. You can actually see the print lines of the 3D print, the stratification lines. Really fascinating, but the mold itself turned out really well. So the next step was to just kind of process these swords, get them in a state where people could kind of get them to the point where they take them home and put them on a shelf or, you know, play around with them, whatever they're going to do. The first step Greg is doing here, you know, he had a rule that certain steps he or his son would do, other steps people would help with, adults, obviously, with angle grinders. The first one is to cut off the mold point, that big mushroom shape, and then he would do some cleaning of the edges around it, and then his son would work to kind of polish up some spots on the edge, some of the bigger spots. But what they weren't necessarily doing was doing the entire polishing of the sword. Too many swords to do in that process. And of course, I'm capturing all this stuff of the Arslantepe sword here primarily. And they did a good bit of it. I actually did some. You'll see me doing it in a moment. But boy, I'm in awe of their angle grinder skills. People who do this all the time, it shows because their quality of work is just amazing. And so I'm actually, you know, here is, you saw the polishing a bit because the order got reversed just because they're grabbing whatever swords were on the table. So here is the the mold point being cut off, the mushroom point being cut off my sword, and Greg's going to clean it up real nice. But his son had already kind of gone through and cleaned up some of the edges. But you can see it's got some rough points still there, and it'll have to be cleaned up. And that's a process that the whole sword will go through to make it look real nice. This one's got a few kind of detailing sections to it, unlike the other blanks. The other blanks were basically just silhouette profiles of swords. They didn't have a lot of detailing in them, so it's a lot easier to clean up. But of course, if you like, for example, if you look at this this khopesh that they're cleaning up, you know, there's not a lot of detailing to the blade or anything. It is just kind of the bar in the shape of the sword. But with the Arslantepe sword, and because I 3D printed it and gave the detail, it has sections that are a lot harder to clean up with an angle grinder. So that didn't get done necessarily for the entirety of the sword. There are bits of it that I left just to keep the actual kind of standard mold look to it. You get that kind of sandy texture. Surprise, surprise, you mold things in sand, you get a sandy texture to it. So when it gets finished, it's going to have that much more polished looking edge, and they kind of do like a polishing pattern to it. It's not mirror finish or anything, but here I am, I'm actually, and that's me, I'm cleaning up a little bit of the edges, and giving it the first kind of passive polish and taking off the sandy texture with the khopesh. And then I wanted to use the khopesh as my practice one. You can actually see the Arslantepe sword sitting right there in front of me, but I wanted to practice on the khopesh, so if I made any mistakes or any rookie mistakes with an angle grinder, not my first time using an angle grinder, but I can't profess to be super proficient at it. I would never make that claim, so I wanted to see what I could learn. And then once I learned it, I started working a little bit on refining the edges of the Arslantepe sword here. But there's a lot of interesting problems that you kind of begin to run into. You've got these curves in there. The blade has a certain profile to it you want to retain. You want to retain the grip, and of course the grip you can only do so much to polish. So we only did a little bit on there, and I basically made the determination I'm going to do it by hand at home to kind of finish it up. And I might even take one additional step and maybe even enamel the little Triforce logo in it to make it look real nice. Of course, this is not bronze, right? It's aluminum, so it's very shiny gray color. That kind of more of a steel look than a bronze look. But that's okay. Again, for me, it's about learning the process, having something cool to bring out of it, something cool to show you as you're watching this process. Some things I did notice kind of after the fact, the 3D print certainly did not hold up perfectly. There is a little bit of a bend in the blade of the mold. I think if I were to redo this again and I were to 3D print a new, you can actually see the bend a little bit in the blade there. If I were to do this again, I would use a stronger infill. Maybe even do a full infill of the plastic, which is very expensive to do. You don't normally do that when 3D printing, but because of the pressures it's going under, you wouldn't want it to bend as much. So yeah, I'm polishing this thing up, doing my best to kind of, not make it so Greg has to do all the finishing work, because he actually does. He spot checks every single one of the swords, or daggers, I guess in this case. You can see a couple Chris's there on the table. He spot checks every single one, make sure it looks good. He doesn't want people to go home with something that kind of looks too shoddy, even though, that might be the fault of someone like me who kind of is goofing their way through trying to keep this thing okay. I'll be honest, I was being very gentle with the angle grinder here. I was not wanting to accidentally grind off too much in any one spot, so I was taking my time a little bit. The more I watched Greg do a lot of the polishing work, the more I realized, boy, he's really going to town on it. I guess I could have pressed a bit more. I just didn't want to. I was a little bit too shy about damaging this thing. I'd gone through the process. I didn't want to screw it up. But yeah, it really did turn out really nicely. The mold held up really well. The finished product coming out of it is really cool to see. And yeah, so I'm going to skip ahead because this angle grinding takes a long time. Real quick, just here is Greg's son working away at the sword. He's putting kind of the polishing pattern on it. So he did a really fantastic job making the blade look really, really, really nice. So like I said, this went through a couple of different rounds of people working on it to kind of polish them up. But it is a bit of a process. And again, you can imagine, you've got 50 some odd swords that are going through this. That's a lot of swords to be polished. And it happened really rapidly. They had this, like I said, they had this class down to a science. It only took about an hour, hour and a half to process all these swords with everyone working on it. All right, so let's skip ahead and just take a look at the two swords side by side after they've been polished. So there's my Egyptian Khopesh. There is my Arslantepe sword. I'm going to hold it up a little bit for the camera as best I can. The light is a little bit harsh, so you don't get the best view when it's not reflecting off of it. But yeah, look at that thing. It looks really nice. Looks really good. Coming off of a 3D print. Really awesome. And I did want to take some close-ups so you could see kind of the quality that you walk away with after one of these classes. It definitely looks very different from when it comes out of the mold. And you can actually see on the grip there, you can see polished blade versus unpolished kind of cross-section where that Triforce is. You can see the difference in the quality of the metal at that point. Also while I was there, quick cut over to this. This is an actual bronze sword that Greg brought along to showcase actual bronze to people. This is one, as I understand it, he had access to a replica or a museum copy of an original, and he made a copy of the copy. And then he made a handle for it, kind of his own version of a handle, with some copper pins to hold it all together. He also had a King Tut's Khopesh, which was really cool. I wish I'd had a chance to take some video of it for you. But alas, it got put away at this point. People were actually, while I was taking that video, people were doing what I'm about to show right now, which is just doing a quick leather wrap. I didn't really need a leather wrap, but might as well do the entire thing as it was done. Some spray adhesive. Do your best to kind of wrap it up, make it look kind of nice. Give yourself a little bit of a grip. This is just, again, so when people walk away from the class, they say, all right, I've got what feels like something of a finished product. And it's okay. It wasn't the best leather wrapping job that I was doing. I would have, if I'd done it properly, if I'd wanted to spend the time to do it, I would have found the exact right length of leather. I would have spent a lot of time planning out how I was going to wrap it, maybe do something real special. But I was just kind of following the standard what other people were doing here. So quick spray of the adhesive and finish up the wrap. All right, so this is cutting back in time a little bit. Let's wrap up this video. 3D print versus the final product. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Greg for his amazing class, for keeping the spirit of historical recreation alive and well, teaching young children this stuff, giving them exposure. He travels all around doing this. He obviously got, the way he puts it, his 15 minutes of fame on how to make everything, the really big YouTube channel. I'm going to link to those again in the description below. And also I'm going to link to his website where you can find out about his upcoming classes, where he's going. Sign up for them. They are pretty limited and they go really fast. I got lucky to get into this class. And Greg is just an incredibly nice gentleman. Really knowledgeable, and so skilled in so many facets of creating these swords. Even though we're doing it in aluminum, he can do it in bronze. He's done it before. He's got some really cool stuff that he's kind of... he's got pokers in the fire, shall we say, and it'll be really cool to see what else he does in the future. I didn't want to record his class. I wanted it to be something that is his to retain, and so definitely go sign up for it. Go check out his class. Go make a cool aluminum sword. He does do bronze classes for adults, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he does them for kids because it takes a lot longer. It's kind of a multi-day affair, if I'm not mistaken. But if you want to, maybe he'll do a bronze class in your area. Who knows? But he mostly does the aluminum these days. Yeah, so that's Greg Wenderski, the sword casting guy. Got a cool moniker, and he is doing amazing work. Go check it out. And thank you everyone for sitting through this entire voiceover video. Doing it pretty low effort. I'm not doing a high production quality here. But yeah, I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to see this really cool process in action and give Greg a little bit more exposure and go through the process of recreating the Arslantepe sword as best I could off of a 3D print. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for watching, everyone.